And good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Astral Perception Show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Mark Johnson, and I have to apologize. We have not been able to put out a show the last couple of weeks. Last week, things were just very busy, and I didn't get around to it. But the week before, I have to admit that I got my second COVID shot. And let's just say that it kind of knocked me for a loop for about 3 days. So I wasn't really in any kind of shape to do a show or talk for any long periods of time. So here I am now. We're back. I've got some interesting things to talk about tonight. You know, I'll mention a little bit about the COVID and the vaccines. I know there's a lot of people out there with differing opinions on this whole thing. I have some of my own opinions. I don't personally believe everything they're telling us. I took the vaccine just because my wife and I want to travel. Now, you know, people have been posting some alarmist stuff out there that anybody who gets the vaccine is going to get really sick in the next couple of years or whatever, and I'm not worried about that. You know what? I figure whatever's going to happen happens. I'm not afraid of dying, although something tells me I'm going to be around for quite a long time. I just have that gut feeling. So, you know what? It's just we're a very crazy world we're continuing to live in. There's a lot of different things going on, and it's hard to tell the truth anymore. I covered that a lot in my premiere show, so I'm not going to really get into it right now. I want to talk about tonight things having to do with spirits and the paranormal. And I'm going to talk a lot more about my own personal experiences. Last week we talked about UFOs, the last episode, and a lot of different things happening in the UFO community. Tonight, I'm going to talk more about my experience as a paranormal investigator, how I got started, and pretty much how things have changed and my viewpoint has changed in these last 20 years that I've been doing this. I mentioned before I've had experiences when I was growing up. You know, I heard my name being called in my room. I had some strange experiences, which I thought might have been out-of-body experiences, strange dreams. But there's other things that have happened even in the last 20-plus years or so. So I'm going to kind of go into that tonight. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to share some paranormal evidence with you, some of the better EVPs that we've captured over the years. Now, I'm showing you audio evidence because obviously this is a podcast. It's not a video cast. You're not going to see any photos that I have. Maybe in a future show, if I decide to move this over to a video podcast, I'll be able to share some of those. But for me as an investigator, one of the best forms of evidence is EVP, also known as electronic voice phenomenon. And for those of you who may not be familiar with it, that is when doing an investigation using, in the old days, we used to use tape recorders, cassette tapes. Now it's digital audio recorders. But I've even captured the phenomenon on my video cameras, audio. And that is usually, it's the capturing of a disembodied voice or sound or something anomalous that was not heard at the time it was recorded. I've had several different types of really strange EVPs that I've personally captured over the years, plus my team, North Jersey Paranormal Research. We've captured quite a few things. So, you know, it's the audio is what really gets me. It's especially when you get something that's an intelligent response to a question. That does happen sometimes. A lot of EVPs, you seem to get voices that are out of context, and they're not really answering a question, and people wondering, well, what are we capturing there? Is a ghost wandering around confused, not knowing what they're doing? I'm going to get into some more possible explanations as we go along. But let's get started at the beginning. And the beginning for me goes all the way back to high school, back in about 1980, 1981, living in Sylmar, California, in the northern San Fernando Valley, north of L.A., and there was, we watched the local television stations, and they had on this show, a documentary on one of the back channels, local stations. It was called The Amazing World of Psychic Phenomenon. And it was a 1970s produced show narrated by Raymond Burr, and it was showing all sorts of ghostly and psychic and other types of phenomena. But the one thing that really piqued my interest was there was a segment of this one researcher traveling around to cemeteries, and he had a big reel-to-reel tape recorder. And he would go around and tape record graves, and then just let the recorder run for several minutes, and then he'd go back and play back the recorder. And sure enough, there were times when he would get voices. And my brother and my next-door neighbor friend, John, and we looked at that, and being, the 16, 17-year-old boys we were, going, oh, we've so got to do this. So we ran out with our tape recorder. It was in the middle of the day, and in Sylmar, there was this old, what they called the Pioneer Cemetery, and there was this old cemetery going back to the 1800s. A lot of pioneers and our early people were buried there. And so we walked through the cemetery. It's gated, but we could get in back at that time. Now it's locked up due to vandalism, which is unfortunate. But we walked into the cemetery, and with our tape recorder, and we'd set it down on graves and start tape recording, and we'd see what we'd get from there. And after we recorded a few graves, we got nothing. And then we walked over to this one grave in the corner. And it was a cement slab covering the grave, but there was no headstone. It was missing. Somebody had taken it. So I set the recorder down, pressed record. We walked about 20 feet away, and understand this is all open. It's a desert-like terrain. There's no trees. There's nobody else around. We are the only ones there. And the recorder was in our sight the entire time. And we let it record for about 5 minutes or so. Then we walked back, and we played it again. And as we're listening, we get about halfway through the recording, and all of a sudden, we hear something, and it's very faint. So we stop, rewind it, play it again, crank the volume up, and sure enough, we caught a voice. It sounded like a woman's voice, or a young woman's voice, and it was the creepiest thing I had ever heard. She whispered, and it sounded exactly like this: "I'm dead, help me." And that was what I would call an intelligent response. And my friend John was absolutely freaking out, and he wanted to run and leave right then and there. And my brother and I are sitting there going, oh, hell no, we got to try to get some more of this. That was my attitude then, and it's still my attitude to this day. It didn't scare me, it intrigued me. So we took the tape recorder, placed it on the grave. I hit record, I walked away, waited about another 5 minutes, came back, turned it off, rewound it, and played it. And what was funny this time is, on those old mechanical tape recorders, when you click record, you actually hear the buttons click because it catches it on the recorder. Then you hear my footsteps on the gravel as I walk away. And just as my footsteps fade out, this same woman's voice chimes in as loud as I'm talking to you right now, and she goes, "It isn't finished." And that's all we got that day. But what was intriguing, and I wish I knew more about audio back then that I do now, the quality of the sound was very, very interesting, because even though we were in a wide open space, the voice sounded like it was coming from within an enclosed room. It had a little bit of reverb to it, but a little bit of a muffled quality to it, but it was crystal clear, what we call a Class A EVP. And we tried to do some research to see whose grave that belonged to, but being 16, 17, we really didn't get that far. We played the recording for all of our friends. Some believed it. Some thought we were full of crap. My mother absolutely thought we were trying to pull her leg because my mother does not believe in these kind of things. And so we kind of put it away. I played with it a little bit more off and on over the years I never really got any more voices. And I was also very religious at the time, going to church, and I started to feel like maybe I was messing around with something that I shouldn't. So I stopped doing it and I left it alone. It would take a few more years later when I realized I just really wasn't religious anymore. I was more spiritual, and I started off on a more spiritual path that I've been following to this day. But with back then, I really didn't get back into the whole ghost thing. And although I read books on ghosts, I was in elementary school, and we didn't have a school library, so we'd get what we called the bookmobile would show up once a month. And when it showed up, we could go in it and check out books, and they had 2 books on ghosts, and I literally checked them out every month. And I read them and reread them. They had pictures of famous ghosts, like the Brown Lady ghost taken in England, and a few others that were very famous for the time. And I was always been intrigued by it. Well, it wasn't until I moved out here to New Jersey in 1999, and I moved out here and got married, and the house I was staying in had activity. And it wasn't long before I just started to notice things were happening. I would hear my name being called. I would get funny feelings like I'm being watched. I would hear some tappings and noises. So I had a video camera, and it wasn't one with night vision. In fact, it was a very old model. It was a Super VHS camera. So I was shooting with a white camera light. I'd have turned out all the lights, but I was still shooting with the camera light. And one night I was by myself in the living room, and I captured an orb coming out of the wall and slowly meandering its way across the floor until it went past the camera. And because it was coming from the back side of the room to the front, ruled out dust, because most orbs are just dust particles floating in front of the camera lens, and they catch the light, whether it's a white light or IR light, and they look like they're floating straight up or to the side or whatever. No, this thing moved in 3 dimensions, and it moved all the way across the room, and it strobed the whole time. It blinked on and dimmed as it went. Very intriguing. And then later on, I was sitting in a chair, and I was panning around the room trying to catch something, and then at one point I saw this really fast-moving streak of light go across the room while I was looking in the camera. And so I followed it over, and I'm focused on this rocking chair on the other side of the room. All of a sudden, this object comes flying out from under the chair and goes flying past me into the kitchen. And I actually saw it with my own eyes. I was watching the viewfinder on the camera, but still in my peripheral vision, I saw this thing go flying past me. So I rewind it, and I'm looking at what I'm seeing here, and I can't believe what I caught. I caught this bulbous, tadpole-like object, and I would say it was about 12 to 14 inches long, had a wide bulbous head and a kind of a tail, and it came flying out from underneath the rocking chair, kind of like almost in a swimming motion, and as it was going past me, it started to stand up vertically as it passed me to go into the kitchen. And, okay, that kind of freaked me out a little bit. I stopped recording for the evening. But then I went back later and rewatched it again, and I was just very intrigued. So the internet was finally really up and running during this time, and I started doing internet research, and I started finding ghost groups that were out there and had web pages. And so there was a local group in my town. So I contacted them and had them come over, and they did an investigation. I investigated right along with them, and I was hooked. So then I joined them. I investigated with them for a couple of years, and then one of the group leaders died. He had cancer, and his wife just didn't have the heart to do it anymore. And I tried to continue with the group, but some of the old members didn't like some of us new members, and there was politics involved. So several of us broke off and formed our own group, which was North Jersey Paranormal Research. And we investigated pretty regularly for about 12, 13 years. And during that time, we investigated a number of very intriguing cases. And the first case we did, there was a house right across the state line in Chester, New York. And it was an 1870s farmhouse. This guy owned it, and he contacted us. And we went and we investigated, and he was having all sorts of issues going on in the house that he couldn't explain. He didn't feel threatened, although the main living room he never really used, and he never even realized it until we were there asking him about it. It was sparsely furnished, and he goes, "You know what? I realize I don't ever really come in here because it just has a strange feeling to it." Well, while he is telling me this, I have my digital recorder running, and I captured what is one of our first EVPs, and it's sounds like a woman sobbing. And I'm going to play this for you, and I want you to hear this. Now, he's telling me that this is why he doesn't use the room, and underneath his voice, there's a very loud woman sobbing. I'm going to play it 3 times. You tell me what you hear.
No problem. No problem. And this is why I don't use this room.
Now, I'm going to play that again. So you listen to the woman sobbing.
No problem. No problem. And this is why I don't use this room. No problem. No problem. And this is why I don't use this room.
Very, very intriguing. And we did get we got a few other EVPs. That was probably one of our best. And we did have some experiences. And one time, my wife and I went back, and we were talking to him, and we were standing upstairs, and it was in July. It was hot outside. There was no breeze. It was a very still, stuffy night, but we were standing at the top of the stairs where he's had some experiences. And while we were there talking, all of a sudden, this gust of air blows through the window. It's ice cold, blows the curtains back, and it was totally uncharacteristic for the evening because it was hot outside and there was no breeze at all. Yet this sudden cold breeze blew in and blew the curtains, and we all felt it. Really interesting case. We investigated his house a couple of times, got some decent evidence. But you know what? It's, we really, and this is one thing I'm going to say up front. One of the reasons I really stopped doing a lot of those types of investigations is so many ghost groups go into somebody's home and they'll bring all their equipment in and they'll record audio and video, or maybe they'll have somebody sensitive and they'll pick up on whatever's in the house. And like the show Ghost Hunters, when Ghost Hunters first premiered about 15 years ago, they would do the same thing. They'd go out, they were out looking to prove the existence of ghosts. But like so many other different groups, they never really help the people who are there. They go in, investigate. I'm guilty of it too. Go and investigate, collect your evidence, share it with the client, and then you leave. You get to go home, and they're still stuck there with whatever's there. We had no psychics. We didn't work with psychics or anything. We had nobody to help us, try to help them get rid of it or whatever. I mean, the most we could do sometimes if we felt it was non-threatening is tell them that it's not anything to be worried about. If it was something they could live with, fine. And then if they couldn't deal with it, they wanted somebody, maybe I'd try to find somebody to help them clear the house. But I really didn't know any reputable psychics at that time. So, again, it's one of those things that really irritates me during doing, and how we used to do investigations and how most ghost groups do it, is we're still not helping the clients. And that is something that now in my later years, if I go into investigation, my first and foremost, my duty is not to collect evidence. It's to help the people. Help them not only come to a better understanding of what it is they're dealing with, but also if they need help getting rid of whatever is there, having it move on, or at least come up with a better explanation. You know, there's so many people have watched too many ghost shows and they think they've got a demon living in their house when they really don't. It's either the house settling or maybe it's something very benign and yet they're just afraid. For example, one early case we did in a very affluent neighborhood in Franklin Lakes, New Jersey. Big mansion house. They called us in because they had a new baby and they were seeing things on the baby monitor and they were afraid it was something that was going to harm the baby. And when we did our investigation, we quickly found out that whatever was there was very nurturing and protective. And we felt nothing negative at all. In fact, there was an attached mother-in-law suite on the house that was empty, and we had no activity on the baby, but we had all this activity happening in this empty part of the house. It was like it was putting on a show for us. And we realized that whatever was there was happy to show itself to us, but it was in the farthest part in the front of the house away from the baby, so we wouldn't disturb the baby. So when we tried to tell that to the client, we quickly found ourselves in a situation where we had to walk away from the investigation because the wife, who was wife number 2 living in wife number 1's home, the husband who owned the home, refused to sell it. He didn't want to move. He put in hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to fix the house up to please his wife, but basically she wanted us to come in and say it was haunted or there was something bad there so she'd have leverage over him to move. And we didn't want to get caught in the middle of that one, so we walked away, which is a shame because there was really some interesting things going on there, but we really didn't have much of a choice, so we walked away. However, I did get a really interesting EVP while I was there, and let me play this for you. Now, in this clip, you'll hear me and a couple of other investigators talking, and underneath us, there is what sounds like a young girl's voice, and we make out, this says, "Jackie, can you hear me?" Well, nobody named Jackie was there that night, so we're not sure where it was, but it was very clear, and here it is. You tell me what you hear. Now you hear it, it's a little faint, so let me play it again. There almost sounds like there's 2 different children's voices talking. There's Jackie, can you hear me? And then there's another child's voice that says something, it sounds like car or whatever. I don't know. I couldn't understand exactly what it was, but it certainly was not any of us. So very, very interesting case. EVP, again, is one of my favorites. For obvious reasons. I'm going to just play a couple of random EVPs that we've caught over the years. There was one case where we were trying to investigate this house, and we felt that there was an old woman's spirit upstairs. And as I was trying to set up a recorder, it was me and a couple other guys from my group. And I caught this voice, and this one is one of my favorite EVPs because the ghost sounded amused by what we were doing. And you can almost imagine her just shaking her head and going, "Oh, boys, boys, boys." Listen to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
That "yeah" at the end is me, but you can clearly hear an older woman's style voice saying, "Oh, boys, boys, boys."
Yeah.
So that one, again, always cracks me up because, you know, even the ghosts seemed to be, like, perplexed by what we were doing. It's like, okay, whatever, guys. Got some very really strange EVPs. We did another house over in Haworth, New Jersey, which is all up here in North Jersey. And a friend of mine recorded this one while we were alone in the house. There was nobody else talking. And we got this extremely low, loud, guttural voice. I'm going to play it a couple times, and then I'll tell you what I think it says. But you listen, well, you can't tell me, but you see if you can make out what it says. I'm going to play that again. Now, that almost does not sound like a human voice. This audio has not been filtered in any way. That is the way the voice sounds. It almost sounds like it's saying very soon. I'm not so sure now. That we thought that at the time, but I'm going to play it again. Now you can hear us talking a little bit in the background when that happens, but I could not figure it out. It's one of those things. We had some activity at this house, but it wasn't anything that what I would call off the hook. But that one EVP was very, very intriguing. Here's another one. There's a restaurant not too far from me, right over the New York State border in Warwick, New York, called the Silvio's Italian Villa. I've investigated that location several times, and it's very, very, I would call it very, very haunted. There's a lot of activity there. And even before we started the investigation, we were doing what we call a preliminary, which is we just walk around the location, and we're recording on audio at the time and taking pictures and just getting an idea of the location, where the hot spots are, and getting ready to plan our main investigation. Well, at one point, I'm downstairs in a storage second kitchen area, and I caught this voice, which is kind of creepy because it's a man saying, "Help me." Listen to this. Now, you hear me starting to say, I think that's my voice. But then this voice comes right in and goes, "Help me." Now, there was a suicide in that house. There was a lot of family tragedy surrounding that house. The former owner, back in the late 70s, I believe, committed suicide in the kitchen. Used one of his rifles, and the bullet hole is still in the ceiling. You can still see it. It's patched, but you can still see it there. So that was an interesting case. They also used to have a cat named Felix, and we used to eat there, I would see the cat all the time outside, and he'd come in sometimes, and he was very cute, and he passed away. Well, during our investigation, we kept hearing a cat meowing, and I caught it several times on my recorder, and yet we couldn't find any cat. There was no cat in the house at all. Yet it was very clear, but I audibly heard it too. I heard it, and we caught it on 3 different recording devices. So it wasn't just an EVP. It was what we call an audible voice phenomenon. We actually heard something. Now, in some investigations, some EVPs, it's not exactly a voice, but we catch something really unusual. This one has always intrigued me. It was during a home investigation, and you're going to hear what sounds like, first like a hiss, like an intake of breath, then a sigh, and then a very, very strange growl. Listen to this. Now, again, you hear us talking faintly in the background, but these 3 noises, all in sequence, and we have no explanation for them. Nobody made these sounds.
What was it?
Now, one of the biggest cases we ever investigated there were two homes on the same street across the street from each other up in Bloomingdale, New Jersey. And it was Bloomingdale had a long history up there. They have a hill up there called Federal Hill where Union soldiers, I guess a couple were hung or shot for desertion. This case was a very, very intriguing case because we had two houses both having activity right next to each other. And we started to realize that it wasn't the homes themselves that was active, it was the whole area. And with that, we realized that other houses in the neighborhood were probably experiencing activity too, but nobody else was talking. So we investigated the first house, which was and all the houses on this street were built in around the 1920s. Now, they used to be farmland on that area, and then in the turn of the century, there was a big fire that went through Bloomingdale and Riverdale and burned most everything. And then they started building housing tracts back in the 1920s, and these old two-story houses, which were beautiful. It was a beautiful home. So we started investigating the one home, and then we would go across the street a few days later and do the next home. But during the first home, the client was very, very frightened. She was very frightened about what was there. In fact, if you just went boo, she would jump and hit the ceiling. She didn't like what was going on there at all. And so while we were investigating, we felt a few things, but something else that we heard, and I heard this audibly and I caught it on my recorder, was whistling. Now, what's interesting is that there have been several cases we've done over the years where we hear whistling. And this one was very, very loud. In fact, it was so loud, I went to the clients and asked them, "Did you just whistle?" And they said no. And I had another backup camera in the room that also caught it, and it shows it wasn't the clients. It sounded like it was right there in the room. Listen to this. Now, that one was filtered a little bit, but you could still clearly hear the whistle. It almost sounds like a little tune going. Here, let's hear it again. Now, in that same house, we captured something really strange. It sounded like heavy furniture moving, and then it's followed by what sounds like a child laughing. Nothing was moved. No furniture was moved at all during this time. Yet this really sticks out as highly, highly unusual, like something was playing with us. Listen to this. So you hear what sounds like a crash, and then like something gets scraped across the floor, and then like a little giggle going, hear it again. One more time. Again, this very, very intriguing. So when you hear these types of recordings and these types of evidence, you start to wonder just what it is you're dealing with. It sounds like in this case, it sounded like something mischievous. Now, we became friends with the clients, and they gave us pretty much open access. And we went back several times over the years, and we caught a lot of different evidence. The second house across the street, in some ways, was more active, and we caught our very first apparition up in the client's bedroom, where a camera, one of our investigators was panning his night vision camera across, and all of a sudden there's this like big blob right in the middle of the floor. It almost looks like a giant head, but it's featureless. And once it seems to realize that it's being seen by the camera, it quickly glides out of frame. Everyone was accounted for. Nobody was in front of the camera at this time. The client would feel some negativity sometimes, and she would see things out in the woods. She'd look out in the woods, and there's a man, or like the silhouette of a man standing out in the woods. Now, we were contacted by a television show, and let me tell you something. I've watched most of the ghost shows that have been on over the years, and back at this time, there were only a couple between Ghost Hunters, and then there was Paranormal State. And Paranormal State contacted us. They were contacting investigation groups all over the place looking for cases. So I thought, well, maybe we'll have them come in and investigate it because they have more resources. Plus, they work with psychics like Chip Coffey or even Lorraine Warren, who used to be with Ed and Lorraine Warren. And so we figured, okay, why not? We'd have them come in, not realizing what we were getting ourselves into. Now, our one client, Julie, she was already afraid, and she told them she didn't want the location revealed. She didn't want her last name revealed. She wanted to try to keep some anonymity. They said, sure, fine, we could do that. Well, then the day came for them to start shooting, and they were going to be there for 3 days. And it was like Hollywood showed up. They brought in these big equipment trucks. They brought in huge lights that lit up the whole street. The whole freaking neighborhood knew we were there and what was going on. She was mortified. And then they mentioned her name on camera, her full name. So now when the show aired, everybody knew, and she had looky-loos driving by the house. It was a complete nightmare. I got to meet, Ryan Buell, and if you knew Ryan's history, he dealt a lot with addiction at the time and afterwards, and was famous all over the internet. And I'm not going to drag him through the mud, but he had problems, and my client caught him doing drugs in her bathroom, which was, if I would have known that, she didn't tell me that till later, I would have shut the whole production down. Said, this is BS. You're treating our clients like crap. They were supposed to shoot, the whole idea was to shoot both houses, do it as like an hour-long double feature. It was going to be the 3rd season premiere. Well, they wound up cutting most of the other house, Patty's house, where we caught the apparition, but there was better evidence there, but she wasn't frightened enough. So they stuck with Julie because she was obviously very scared, and that's what they wanted. They wanted the fear. They wanted the scary stuff sells. And when the episode aired, they used our evidence out of context, making it seem like everything that we caught was all over in the one house, when it wasn't. It was out of the other house. So they lied. And then they brought in their psychic, Michelle Belanger. And I know there are a lot of fans of hers out there. I'm not one of them. And I'll tell you the reason why here in a second. But they shot some things out of order, too, and it really misrepresented the case. Now, there was a legend in the backyard, or actually it was the side yard, that supposedly when the house was built back in the 20s, they found human bones, and they thought maybe it was Native American because there was a lot of Native American living in that area for hundreds of years. And so they thought maybe there's some burials. Now, don't get me started on the whole Native American burial ground, because I'm not even going to go there. I don't buy into that, per se. There's not much difference between a Native American burial ground and your local cemetery down the street. They all contain dead, decomposing bodies, but whether or not the spirits are still there or move on, who knows? I will say, though, that in a lot of Native cultures, they do call on spirits to protect the area. But there's not a lot of evidence showing that there's any real difference. But let me get into this. So the production company did the only good thing they did was bring in a ground penetrating radar team. So they scanned the whole yard with radar, and what they found was fascinating because under the ground, they not only found these 5 white splotches, which is what looks like on the image that when they print it out, and the radar operator called those areas of interest, but off the record, he told me, yeah, those look like burials to me. So there was at least 5 bodies buried there, but the more interesting part was there's this giant circular structure buried underneath her property. It's a perfect circle. And what's interesting is at one end of the circle, it seems to be, it comes up to a point. And then at the other opposite end, it kind of, there's like something like fanning out, almost like there's an arrow going through it. Makes me wonder if it's like the Native American stone circles or medicine wheels. But there didn't seem to be any spokes. It was just this circular structure. Well, I really wanted to dig that up and investigate, but Julie was just so terrified by that point, she wouldn't let anybody do it. We had to respect her wishes, so to this day, we still don't know what's buried there. And the house is sold, new people own it. So, yeah, well, it'll be one of those things we'll never know unless they decide to excavate to put in a pool or something. But when they did the radar, they did it the very first day. Then the next day they brought in their psychic and they filmed her from the waist up. Now, when they do ground penetrating radar, they put these little orange flags everywhere to note where they've scanned and where they may have found things. And when they did that, they filmed her from the waist up. And then she started saying, "Oh, I feel something's buried out here." I'm going, "Well, no shit, Sherlock. You're standing amongst all the flags showing where they think they found something on the radar." It was such a joke. Now, they did have some minor experiences while they were there, but the production company, and this is what I found out about a lot of these production companies, they don't care. They will fake things. They want to make a show interesting and scary because that's what sells. And if they knew the truth about paranormal investigation, 9 times out of 10 you go somewhere and nothing happens and it's boring as hell. So they have to try to amp it up. And of course everything's always has to be something negative or a demon. And I was so angry with them and how they treated my other client, Patty, that she was so mad after that they cut her out. She said that, they used her house for a bathroom stop. And they even showed some footage of them investigating her bedroom, but they made it seem like it was in Julie's bedroom. Again, it was just all a complete mess, and I've been very vocal and angry about it for over 10 years now. So when you watch these shows, take them with a grain of salt. Now, the only show that I watch religiously that I love, and I feel that for the most part, the evidence they present is legitimate, is Ghost Adventures. Now, there's going to be a lot of you screaming, "Oh my God, it's fake, and I can't stand Zach Baggins. He's such a drama queen," whatever. Yeah, I agree with that. Zach is a big personality, and I do not agree with their whole everything's a demon stance, and even some of the evidence they capture on EVPs, they think it says something when all I hear is garbling. And they're always freaking out like, "Oh my God, dude, did you hear that?" Which I think they're being a little overdramatic for television. However, I'll give them credit. I think that they've caught some really fascinating evidence over the years. But it's like I tell you, what do? They show up, investigate, and leave, and they're not really helping people. Although in later seasons, when they're dealing with what they call a couple of demonic cases, they try to bring in exorcists or people to help calm the family, and they've done a couple exorcism episodes, and I'm kind of like, on the fence on those. So don't sit here and think that I think everything that they do is legit, or I believe everything. I just don't believe they're faking it. I just also don't believe that they're coming up with the right conclusions. And speaking of conclusions, let me say something about it's about ghosts and the paranormal, and even what was happening with Julie and Patty's house. Because as the years progressed and the more I began to learn, we realized what was on the property was attached to the land, and it was covering a large space of land. And we started to feel, when I started to, I mean, again, I'm not saying I'm psychic, but I started listening to what my body is telling me, is putting the equipment away, go with your intuition, going with your gut feelings. I started to pick up that whatever was there was attached to the land and has been there for a very long time. I started to think it was something along the lines of nature spirits, or even what you think of as elemental entities. And I could do a whole show going in and talking about all different types of elemental type entities all over the world, from, the Celtic fairy lore to Icelandic elves to the little brown people, the Carolinas, to even the Middle Eastern, the jinn. There are supposed entities, beings that we share the planet with, that have the ability to kind of come in and out of our dimension. We don't always see them, but yet they're not exactly spirits either. And some can be malicious, some can be playful, some can be just they're pulling people's legs, they're screwing around. They could be as varied as any other human being you come across. And that's what I feel was going on in that property. And I would still love the opportunity to go back there sometime and continue the investigation and see if the people who are living there now are still experiencing things. There are several areas where I live here in northern New Jersey, several properties where I lived, where I feel like whatever was there was, again, attached to the land. My first house that I lived in, where I caught my first weird anomaly on video and joined the paranormal group. It wasn't just my house. My future wife, after I got rid of the other one, the future wife who lived next door, she was having activity over there too. And when we moved in together after we got married, we had several things happening there. Then we moved over to a section above Vernon here called Glenwood. And the mountain on Glenwood had a reputation for things happening. I did an investigation there once, and probably one of the closest negative investigations I ever did. The woman was really scared. She said something tried to push her down the stairs once. Her kids were constantly having nightmares. And we went in there. When we did the preliminary investigations, I felt something was giving me heart palpitations and intense anxiety, and I realized whatever was there was trying to get me to leave. And my other investigator friend, he got shocked by some kind of electrical discharge out of the air in the basement. And so we walked out to the parking lot, to the driveway, to talk, and we still felt it. It was like still trying to get us to leave. It wasn't until we got into our cars and drove away that the feeling dissipated. We were fine. Then we came back a week later and did an investigation with a full team. Nothing at all happened. It was hiding. It wanted nothing to do with us. And so we really couldn't help. A few years later, I wound up buying a house 2 streets away up the hill. And then that house started having activity. Certain things were happening with the house. Nothing we did to the house trying to improve it ever worked. Several times my wife would see a shadow or an apparition walk past the hallway. She thought it was me, and she would call out to me, and then she'd hear me answer. I'm downstairs in the basement. It wasn't me. I had a friend who came over, and his young child kept pointing at the corner of the room and saying, snow. We were seeing snow. Well, what does snow look like? White, big white something, maybe vaporous. So there was a lot of activity, and then we found out a lot of people in the neighborhood had activity, and so that turned into another hotspot. That whole hill, that whole area, something is going on that's attached to the land. Again, people can say, well, maybe it's Native Americans, or I tend to feel it's something with this area. It has a lot of nature spirits or elemental type of entities that are here. There are ghosts, and my whole opinion of ghosts have changed over the years. You know, everybody thinks when they see something happens, oh, it's a ghost playing around, or somebody who died, they don't know they died, and they're still going through the house. I think I mentioned before in my first show about a friend of mine walking into a room and seeing the apparition of a woman in old Edwardian-style maid's clothes, but then they both looked at each other, and both of their jaws dropped because they saw each other, and both were shocked, and then the woman disappeared. And my whole take on that was, it wasn't a ghost. I think it was a time slip. I think that two moments in time overlapped briefly, where two very much alive, living, breathing human beings saw each other through a rift in time. And I think that what we deal with a lot of times when people see apparitions that seem to be going about their business and they're unaware of you, sometimes I think you're dealing with a time slip rather than the spirit of someone who has died or is still hanging around. Those do happen. They are, I think, a little more rare than people realize. Now, we do get visits from dead loved ones, people who can come to us after they've died, they've crossed over. And here's the difference between a ghost and a spirit. A ghost usually can be determined as someone who's died who has not moved over to the other side, to the spiritual plane. They're staying here in this physical realm for a number of reasons. There could be the old adage of unfinished business. Maybe they were very religious and they felt like they didn't live a good life, or maybe they did some bad things and they're afraid of going to hell, so they're afraid of moving over. And that's where either a good psychic or someone who has had some training can come in to try to talk with these spirits of these people and get them to move over to the light, because once they do, they're transformed. They come into their full being and they'll see there's nothing to fear. There is no hell. There is no punishment. The only hell that we deal with is what we currently put ourselves through now. Or even those people who are afraid to move on after death, they're putting themselves through a type of hell, maybe because they feel they deserve it, or, again, they're afraid to move forward. So it's a number of different reasons. There are some people who have died that aren't aware that they have died. Now, that does happen. And the reason that happens, you think that somebody would think, oh, my God, they should know they've been dead when they can't touch anything, or if they talk to people, nobody's listening. But I think that in some cases, those people, they're in what I think of as a dream state. And you know how when you're in a dream, you are just going about doing whatever it is you're doing in your dream. And it's almost like a fugue state, and you're just not aware of your conscious reality unless you are able to lucid dream, in which you start to take control of what's happening in the dream. And so I think it's an altered form of consciousness for some people. They're not in their full conscious totality, and if they did, more than likely they would be able to move on. So that's a possible explanation. There are the elemental explanations that I mentioned, where there's something going on, nature spirits. There are areas of high strangeness where multiple types of phenomenon seem to be happening. And I've mentioned this before with the UFO phenomena. There's sometimes you'll get combinations of UFOs, ghosts, poltergeist activities, and a very unexplained phenomenon all taking place in one location. Skinwalker Ranch in Utah is a perfect example. There's also my friend John Edmonds, his ranch, the Stardust Ranch down in Arizona, where he's been having a hell of a time for the last 25 years dealing with what seems like aliens, but there's ghost-like activity. There's all sorts of different paranormal type of activity going on there. This world is a lot stranger than we realize. Reality is not only stranger than we can imagine, it is stranger than we could ever imagine. And some things are beyond our comprehension, and they're going to remain beyond our comprehension because these, like sacks of meat in our heads, we are able to interpret and understand and comprehend some things, but there are some things that are beyond our comprehension. We just can't imagine it in this three-dimensional reality. So going into future shows, we're going to start talking a little bit more about what's going on in these other realities, these other dimensions. What happens when a person dies? What can you expect? I mean, there's the near-death experiences that some people have had, or even during astral travels, they're able to travel to some of these different realities and experience things that are beyond our comprehension here. Native American Lakota Sioux medicine man Black Elk, in the famous book Black Elk Speaks, he had visions when he was young, and in those visions he always said that what happened in those visions were more real than what happens here in waking life. And I've heard that from several people, that, this world that we're living in is almost an illusion. It's created, this three-dimensional reality is created for us to come down here and learn during our lifetimes. It's one time Whitley Strieber, in one of his early books, I don't know if it was Communion or Transformation, when he was starting to have, like, in his mind a one-on-one chat with these visitors, he asked, what is the earth? And the response he got was, it is a school. And that fits in even with the term of reincarnation. We come here to learn lessons. We come here to have experiences. People also liken what we're dealing with is to the Matrix, in the movie, the artificial reality. And I think because we're temporary here, we live here temporarily for our lives, and when this life is over, we go back home. This isn't our home. This is where we're visiting. Now, we could feel a strong attachment to it. I love planet Earth. I think the Earth is beautiful. I hate what we're doing to it. I don't like what's going on with humanity. But if you separate all that out and look at the planet itself, it's the most beautiful planet in our solar system, and we found planets elsewhere now. We know that there are hundreds of planets that we know of, which probably means there are millions of planets, which probably means there are some very Earth-like planets out there. And they are probably beautiful in their own way, but yet I've also heard people who've had abduction experiences to talk with these beings where they even mention there's something special about Earth. There's no place quite like it. The abundance of life, the greenery, the whole energy of Earth. There's something special about it here. So we come here and we learn. We have our experiences, and when we die, we move on. Sometimes we don't move on. Trust me, when it's my time to check out, I'm not sticking around. I am going to definitely move over and go home and then see where my next adventure is going to be. And so that's something we'll talk about on the next show. What to expect after this life, and where we can go from here, and learning about much higher, different concepts. So I want to thank everyone for listening to another edition of the Astral Perception Show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. As always, I welcome your feedback. You can reach me on Facebook through the Paranormal UK Network page. You can email me at mark@paukradio.com. Give me your feedback. You can comment on our Spreaker page, even if it's to tell me I suck, or if you have ideas for shows. Please feel free. I want to hear from you. Again, thank you, everybody. I want you to have a wonderful week and a great Memorial Day weekend here in the United States, and we will catch you all next time. Have a good one.